Cumana Yves Aguinushla, August Fáilte Roibh Quick Comhra, our global conversation about Irish dance. And we have two fabulous guests today, Paula Hunkin Doyle from Auckland and Orlaith Ni Bhriain from Limerick.
Thank you.
Very good. Do you want to tell us about yourself?
So I am a resident of New Zealand and I started Irish dancing way back in the 80s. And actually yesterday I visited the first place that I had my Irish dancing lesson in. And from there I have become a TCRG, a DCRG and a BG, along with now the president of the Traditional Irish Dancing Association of New Zealand, which has allowed me to have a voice for our region at CLRG meetings. But in general, it's a great way for me to connect to my family life and my culture and express who I am. And it's a wonderful part of who I am today. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
You're very welcome. The interesting fact I found about you is that you know the whole routine for Backstreet's Back. Anytime the Backstreet Boys are played, you have to get up on the dance floor and dance it. Is that true?
I'm a bit of a boy band girl. So
Love
Backstreet
it.
Boys are like my vibe. And yes, if it comes on at any sort of event, clear the floor because I'm out there. I can't do it as well as I used to because my knees are probably both stuffed from Irish dancing. But yeah, just a great part of just sort of loving dance and performing. So
Very
that's,
good.
did you find that through Leanne?
Hi, Leanne.
I'll get her later. I'll get her later.
Irene, Auckland named after Lord Auckland in 1840, I found out in my studies, and you have 70 volcanoes in Auckland.
Yeah, and there's a great walk around Auckland to do all those volcanoes. And we have a great event here run by my sister and I called the City of Sails, which is in the heart of Auckland and just that waterfront sort of aspect. And I know, Michael, you've been out
It
to
is
judge it
fabulous.
for the
For
last couple of
anybody that
years.
wants to go from around the world, it is fabulous. Yeah.
Would love
Yeah,
to.
we want everyone to us. So thank you for everyone that has come, and hopefully we see other people in the next few years. So thank you.
That was great. And thank you, Paula. So Orla from Limerick, how are you? Welcome.
I'm great, thank you. It's a great idea, and I'm delighted to be able to be part of this project. As you said, I'm from Limerick. I'm the third generation of my family to teach at Scully Rourke, which was founded in 1929. So I'm feeling now that we're heading close to the century, I'm starting to feel like I was there for all of it. So that's sort of something I inherited, like a farm that doesn't yield any profits, only the pain of the land, as you know. And then my day job is I'm a lecturer in ethnochoreology, so I teach dance at the University of Limerick. So there's no escaping from the culture, I'm afraid.
Fantastic.
Is it true, Orla, and I don't think there can be any story about Scully Rourke without your mother being involved, but is it true that you were left at a fesh as a baby?
It was me, it was my brother, but it is true.
Oh,
He was
was it
handed,
your brother? Oh,
yeah,
Dad, I thought it was you.
he was handed into the box office at Féile Limni during the belt. And the belt is a trophy that was going since 1911. So it was a big deal to win the belt. And when the results of the belt was on, they realized that the baby was still in the box. Well, we knew the person in the box office, but yes, that is true.
That's the kind of life you grew up in. And then Limerick, your mother said to me that my grandmother was a potato cake. What's a
Oh,
potato
so
cake?
yes. Yeah, so it's funny because there's always, as you know, being a Clare man, there's always some doubt about where the border is between Limerick and Clare. And at the
Yes.
moment, I live right on it, and I live half my life in the University of Limerick, which is actually in County Clare, and the other half in Ennis. So most of my time is spent on the Ennis Road. But a soda cake is somebody from Thomond Gate, so that's the north gate of the city, so just over the River Shannon. So if you got a bit of soda cake in you, Michael, you won't go far wrong.
Right. My grandmother was christened in that church. And your mother said, oh, she's a soda cake then. So that was
Oh,
it.
so she was christened in St. Munchins then.
Oh, yes, she was.
Yeah.
And then what? I mean, why was there soda cakes? Why do they call that?
I don't know, actually. My
It
mother
was
always said
something.
that we used to sing it from the Leaving of Limerick. Only my aunt used to sing that song.
I believe when Limerick was under siege, the revolutionaries would come out at night and the people would leave soda cakes on the windowsills for them to feed them. And that's where it came from. That's
But
my
there
little
you go. There's tough stuff in all these beleaguered, besieged Limerick people.
I know exactly. So anyhow, welcome. So my co-hosts today are Glenn Simpson.
Hello.
Hi, Ken. Hi, Glenn. And Kim Lancaster, all the way from London, Ontario. Can I ask each person around the table to say, is it an art or a sport? Paula.
Can I say both?
You can say whatever you
I
like.
think like sport, you have to be physically able to do something, but art, it has to come from a passion and a love and a desire to bring that to other people. So I would love to say that Irish dancing is certainly both, and I hope people look at it that way moving forward.
Brilliant. Orla.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to train like an athlete, but think and feel like an artist. And I think that'll bring out the best of Irish dance. And it goes back to, it's not a question of an American anthropologist. He used to say it's not Irish dancing, it's now Irish dancing. And that'll be tomorrow's Irish dancing. So I think that's important.
Have we changed with the progression of dancing? Have we moved so far, which what we should do in the evolution of dance? Have we gotten away from tradition? Is there some thought to that maybe you have, Orla? Maybe you could give us your opinion on that idea to start.
Yeah, I think we have moved on, and we have to move on if we want to stay relevant. But I also think it's sort of a continuum between tradition and innovation, and we all find ourselves at different times on a different part of that spectrum. So for example, if I am dancing in a thatched cottage that has a really small floor, then I'm not going to have a lot of room, and I'm going to dance the way people used to move when houses were small. But if I go on to the festival in Lorient and dance in the stadium in front of thousands of people, then they're not going to see me on that little space, and you've got to move. So I think yes, it has moved away, and I think we really need to think about what's important. Like even in our own families, I often say this to my students: what are the traditions from your family that you would like to take with you into the next generation? And you shouldn't take all of them. Because they have to have value. So you pass on something that came down from the previous generation, but also something that has value for the next generation, because the next generation has got to be the most important one. So I think you should have roots
Absolutely.
and wings. I think that's really important.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that. It's
I
like,
do too, actually.
Yeah.
Digesting that is brilliant.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
really, really well said.
how important is the tradition when you're on the other side of the planet? I mean, you're as far as you can get from Ireland, and
And just apologies, my dog is having a good old bark in the background.
Please don't apologize. We love him already, and he sounds awesome.
She's very defensive. I
Okay,
think, sorry, does that work for moving forward? Okay, so I love the fact that social media has allowed myself as a dance teacher to kind of stay connected with what is happening innovation wise. Prior to that, you had to have people come over from the Northern Hemisphere and kind of keep you up to date with things. Yes, you still have those beautiful traditional movements. I see them as the movements from traditional set dances like rocks and cross keys and just really intricate little fine motor movements. But also that doesn't suit all dancers. So you have to kind of evolve and go, well, actually, those suit that dancer, that suits that dancer. But I love the fact that social media has provided a really kind of professional development for us who are away from all those really big events, whether it's festivals or competitions. It's kind of given me a little bit more confidence to kind of stretch outside of my normal go-to. I think, like when you've got like a certain style and you work towards it and go, well, actually that doesn't suit that dancer. But I love the fact that there still is dancers that can do those intricate movements and do those traditional movements, and they should still be obviously kept in all our aspects of dancing, but then suit the girls or the dancers and the boys that can do the other aspects. But for example, if I have a dance that can't kick, I'm not going to put kicks in. If I have a dance that can do great rocks, I'm going to put them in everywhere. It just doesn't mean that those traditional movements will suit every type of dancer, but hopefully you can put some aspect in as they grow as a dancer and get more confident and more sort of ability to do those, because that's what we base them all on. Like your basic dancers are all on those intricate movements, and if you can keep them in, I think that's a great thing for a judge to see or anybody to see on any stage, as those beautiful like you say, traditional movements that are just, if they're done well, like it kind of takes your breath away and you go, oh, that's just how Irish dancing should be. And as I said, social media has probably been a good thing and a bad thing for us on this side of the world.
You find a question for you there with that in mind there, Paula. do you find that there are certain dancers that excel in performance that maybe don't do so well in competition? Or do you find it's the opposite way around, that some guys love competition, but when it comes to performance, they're like, oh, I don't know, and how do you think that affects the overall dancer, as it were?
I think there's can be some dancers that are not technically great, but have a great show. It's probably not the right term, showmanship.
Yeah.
They can go, hey, look at me.
Hmm.
You probably might not actually look at their feet as much, but they're like, look at me, I'm loving this stage, I'm loving this time on the stage. And then you'll
Hmm.
have dancers who are beautifully footwork wise, but don't want to show themselves off. And that's just a personality thing. And I don't think you can kind of teach that because it is usually based on who a dancer is as an individual. Like, for example, I've had dancers who have just the most beautiful feet but can't show themselves off, and vice versa. And I'm sure we've all had that in our classes. But I think there is now more performance based to it
Yeah.
than it used to be, say, back in my time of competition, which was the 1990s, just prior to sort of the river dance and law of the dance, and sort of being that show, that show person and performing on stage. And I think that's a really big aspect now that dancers and teachers are trying to cater to.
Yeah, I think that is important, that some schools, the universities, are training people in Irish dance and the methodology and the history and all these things that never happened before. And I think that, for for some dancers who really do not gel with competition, just love dancing and for the love of it and for the artistry of it, is our topic today, and they just want to perform. They just want to dance on the stage for whoever wants to watch, or nobody, as the case may be, and just for the love of dance, and I think that's important. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, is like it comes from here. Doesn't really matter if it's competition or if it's performance, but let's say we love both aspects of it, and I think it makes us a more well-rounded dancer overall, you know?
I think you're right. I think the passion is really important. I think because it can be a difficult road, as can anything that you dedicate like your 10,000 hours of expertise to. And when those hard moments come, you have to remember like that you really liked this at some point, and that's why that you stick with it. It's the if you want to excel at anything, there's going to be pain and pleasure. Like that's the way it is. But I think you're right, because I think if you love to dance, that'll sustain you through. And if you have that internal motivation, whereas if you're relying on the trophy to make you feel good about your dancing, well, then, as you say, that's
It's going to
putting
be a
it
hard
in
road,
somebody
you
else's
know?
control, and there's just no point. Yeah.
Exactly. And, something that like we have to remember that as young children around the world, we start to do this, and very soon we realize that it's not just the trophies, it's not just the music, it's not just the thing, it's all of everything put together, and it just forms like a little bond of awesomeness that we call Irish dancing, and it becomes like something that we actually genuinely love and takes us through many difficult times. They come and go, and we've had some recently, but Irish dancing just seems to be there when we really need it, you
Michael,
know?
Michael, you had a very good question, kind of segueing from that about competition and ages and the athleticism that we put on the children to compete. Do you want to ask that?
I think a lot of people here, there are people watching, are dying to know how much time you spend doing athleticism. Both of you have extremely good schools. Do you find now that you spend more time doing warm-ups and drills and exercises than you had to before? And how many hours a week does that take on top of your dance practice? And then are we doing it too young? Is 10 way too young to be having a world champion? You're the best in the world. They're never going to match it ever again in their whole lives, probably. And does it make for stable adults as a result? So I guess the two question is, are we doing it too young, and how much are you doing it?
I think there's a lot more knowledge available these days in regards to warming up and sport and exercise information from a lot of different dance forms, and I found that very valuable. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Sport and Exercise, and this was done in the early 2000s, and that's evolved so much more now in the last 20 years. So there is more information to, like, the warm-up process and preventing injury. In saying that, though, a lot of young dancers are probably attempting things that are beyond their physical capabilities, whether that's their physical development, their Irish dancing development. So they might try something that's beyond their means and then they get themselves injured. Or it might be just that's not something I can do without doing these sorts of progressions. And I think professional development ourselves as teachers, whether that's knowledge via, like yourself, a college degree and those sorts of things, like professional development within our organisations would be really, really helpful. But I think if you can sort of bring those little aspects through in all levels, it means that when they want to try those skills, that there is hopefully less of a risk to a dancer. But if they're kind of prone to just being, so there's dancers that are always like going to roll their ankles, you know, and that's just based on the fact that they've got certain body alignment. But again, that knowledge is not for everybody. Nobody has all that. So I think some more education around that would be really helpful for us as dancers and teachers moving forward to prevent those and have longevity in Irish dance. So for example, back in my day, you kind of gave up at 18 and 19 because your body was kind of stuffed. But now dancers are lasting longer because they have so much more information and scientific research, training, stretching, the amount of things online, which I think is really great, but it's just trying to kind of bring all the great things together to make it worthwhile for Irish dancers.
And
So,
are
Paul,
they doing it, sorry, go on.
go ahead, Mike.
Are they doing it too young? Are we pushing the kids too young into a World Championship under 11, do you think? Paula, do you think that we're pushing them too young? Should the World Championship age go further down or what?
Orla, what's your opinion on that there?
I think we're getting to the stage where they're retiring now, like at 12. But I think because what has happened is that the amount of time and energy as well as money that has to be invested to reach that elite level at anything is means that by the time they go into secondary school or high school or whatever, they're thinking it's not just a hobby, it's a way of life. So only if you're obsessed with it will it last all the way through. I mean, I think it's, Paul, something you said there too. We're all teachers. We're dancing teachers. Now, some of us may have other skills as well, but nobody has all the skills that it takes. And now it's taken a whole village to create I mean, we used to go to class in a small little hall. It was lovely. We'd great fun. We'd bring our potatoes and our drink. And then one day potatoes were banned and we were all upset, you know. Whereas warming up was putting your hair in a ponytail. Like that's what we did. It was dancing then. It was not, I mean, yes, it was physical activity, but it wasn't considered a sport, not by anybody. Whereas now people are legislating, oh, this is a physical activity that requires athleticism, that requires training, that requires protection of your bones, discipline of mind and body. I mean, it really needs that now. I mean, yes, there can still be fun if you're going one day a week and you're going to dance at the local Christmas concert. But if you sign up for that second day, that third day, that big new dress, then you're investing like people are mortgaging their houses, giving up their holidays. So the investment, not just by the dancer, but by the teacher and the family puts on all sorts of pressure. And Michael, I think it's hard because I might say like, I'm not going to teach them the hornpipe until they're such and such. But then they're saying, oh, well, there's this fesh on and they all have to have the hornpipe under 8 or under 9. So then what do you do? So I think there are certain things that we shouldn't be doing until their bones are fully formed. And I'm not a physio, I'm not a medic. I'm just somebody who, you know, has lots of pains and aches from doing things that you shouldn't do in dance, you know. So I do think like I don't think we should stop the innovation, but I do think that we should always keep the welfare of the dancer at the center. And I think that's really key.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Orla. And my question was there, you all obviously we're all aware of the toe walk ban until 11, you know, and it's been around for a while. Do you think that there should be more types of, you know, CLRG coming in and saying, listen, our children need to be protected this way and the other way, as why, because that's the reason why we do this. We do this for our children, for the children out there that want to learn. So is there any other, you know, should they isolate any other movements that children shouldn't be doing until a certain age group, or should they, you know, what do you think?
I think it's a broader thing than that, because I think what's happening is like when we, a long time ago when I was young, we used to run around in the field and we used to play in the schoolyard. We used to jump, we played skipping rope, we jumped up and down. A lot of children we walked, we cycled. They don't do that. They're driven everywhere. Their parents carry their school bags for them and pack their lunches. So they don't have the same functional mobility which is seriously a problem. And then on top of that, you're balancing them on the top of one toe without any of, like, because we mightn't have had fancy warm-ups and cool downs, but we could all run and jump because we had to run home from school, get in out of the rain. There was that. And I think with the culture that we have now, there's a fear of, activity in public places. So it's all corralled into clubs and societies, which is good and bad. Like football used to be in the street, and then they had uniforms and regulations. So, I mean, we've copied that. We've copied that. We modeled our dancing on like post-Victorian sports, like, Little League football. And now we have a rule for everything. Before, somebody could kick a ball over their head, they were able to. Now you have to be standing in a certain part of the field to be able to do it. And we're doing the same with dancing. I do think we should take some advice from, I mean, there's no point in the physios just saying rest, because the dancers won't rest because they love to dance. So we've got to find something else for them so we have to find a way to make them responsibly stronger, I think. And I don't think we should be doing things where they have the full weight of their body, like when their bones aren't formed. I don't.
I agree, 100%. Yes, 100%. Their welfare has to come first, no matter what it is. They want fancy things that they want to do. And no matter how artistic it is.
Should we limit our season to say 4 months fishing, 4 months recital, and 4 months rest? Would that be an idea in the interest?
Kind of restrictive, but yeah, possibly.
I think the fact that there is no downtime is a serious challenge.
I do
Like
too.
professional athletes who are getting paid like lots of money have an off season. And we have none. And we have to responsibly do that. And it's hard to do. I mean, you try to do it, but then there's the next event and the next event and the next. And if you look at the calendars are fairly crowded, but there definitely should be a time for rest and recovery for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's a really valuable point of understanding the cycle of an elite athlete. So if you think of these dancers that are competing at those two major events that I know of, the All Irelands and Worlds, for every other region, they have to work out, okay, when is my Oireachtas, when is my nationals, what are those, where do I have to kind of peak? And for somebody who's 10 or 11, they should just be dancing, right? They don't have to kind of think about that. It's those dancers that are looking for those podium places that are doing all these things that we talked about, all are like, I'm doing this extra training, and I'm doing swimming, and I'm doing my PT. Like, they're in it for different reasons to the other dancers. But if you look at sort of the hemispheres, so for example, you've got the All Irelands coming up at the end of February. I'm going to use CLRG, All Irelands and the Worlds. Our dancers don't get any downtime either. So for example, if you're going to Worlds, we are working through that summer. So for example, some girls might not have had a break for 2 or 3 years. I'm going to use girls because that's who I've got at the moment. But those dancers have not had a break. So they are physically, mentally, emotionally drained, but that drive of what they're working towards is so big, and it shouldn't be the be all and the end all, but that is just, they get to that level where that's all they're working towards. But I hope that we can kind of come up with ways of seasoning it, is that the right word? But because we're in two different hemispheres, I think that's a really hard way to look at it, because you are all in the peak of their season, we're in our downtime. So if we're in our downtime, we're losing behind you guys. Like, it's a catch-22 for the different regions that are involved in Irish dance.
I think we should have 2 worlds every year, one for our side, west of the Rockies, and we should have that in Hawaii every year. And then you could run, each country could run it around, and then let all of them go to Ireland every year. We're fine.
But you could have a world every second year. I mean, look at the Olympics. Nobody could live as an Olympian if it was on every year. So like, those are good models to look at, because there is a, there's a training time, then there's, the winter and and you have Winter Olympics that's separate in the 2-year cycle. So I do think, because we have made competition the be all and the end all. Like, I have some children who, it's funny, at the beginning, everybody says they just want to dance, on the enrollment form, that they just want to dance for recreation. And everybody ticks that because they think that's the normal box to tick, right? So I put down, do you want to dance for fun, dance in performances, compete? And in the very beginning, most people do not tick compete. But then when one person ticks compete, then everybody takes it, and then that changes. So we've ended up like separating out like the fesh practice from the show practice because it's a different tempo. It's a different tempo of the class, you know. If I have to run Planksty Davis and the Blue-Eyed Rascal 7 times, I don't have time to be doing treble reels and having the crack. So it has to change. It has to change. And I think that's really hard because when people get hooked on the competition, some of the common sense goes out the window.
I also find though, having competition gives them something to work towards, whether that's competition or grades, like we do both. I feel like it's having a goalpost and that you have to kind of go, we've got to get it towards that. Whether that's just improving their turnout or getting that step and those techniques things. But even if they weren't working towards competition, it's still like you still want them to be a good Irish dancer, right? So I know that even though most of our kids are non-competitive, still having a goalpost of a class comp or a grade exam, it kind of gets their A and G. I don't know if that's a New Zealand kind of term. Like it gets a bit of fire in their belly and going, right, I've got to get this sorted. And yes, I've got a performance to work to. Yes, you've got a great performance to do, but how are you going to dance? What if there's someone in the audience that's an Irish dancer? I want you to still be a really good Irish dancer. So I think having the goalpost or whatever it is, sometimes it just makes you do things a bit probably faster or at least give them incentive to get it better quicker.
So following on what you were saying, Paula, in the Southern Hemisphere, you're in the summer. Right now, we're in the midst of winter in Canada. And we don't have feshes running simply because, travel is awful and predictable and everything else. But we find, even though we do have that seasoning downtime where the children can rest, that fear of missing out, because we know the Irish are dancing every weekend. It's that mentality that is almost where the athleticism gets a rest. Like you say, we don't even really have the grade exams other than maybe a Christmas recital. We're quiet now till 2 weeks from now, which I think is our first fesh. So that's us gone all of January, most of February without a fesh. So we're the upside down of that. But the fear of missing out is still the drive because we know everyone else is still dancing.
Yeah, and I would be honest, in the Southern Hemisphere, there is nothing from our nationals until Worlds. So that is at least 4 to 6 months. And the only way Southern Hemisphere dancers will get that stage time in is to travel earlier. So they're not just working through the summer, they actually don't have something to kind of see where they're at, they sort of place it. So for them, we try and just do as much as you can in class and then maybe send them over earlier just to get a few feshana in wherever the Worlds or those All Islands are. But there is a really big gap between competition and the world stage. So Australian nationals were early October, so was New Zealand. I'm not sure on South America and South Africa, but there would be a really big lull. And to keep that motivation up, whatever the motivation is, whether it's just, getting my stuff ready for the next year or just trying to compete on a world stage, we are at a disadvantage based on the fact that you don't have that stage time. But it depends on what you're working towards.
So going from that with the motivation for you as teachers trying to put that onto students, what keeps you motivated, both as teachers with highly active schools, highly successful schools? Going back to the athleticism, are you finding it harder to do the moves, the tricks, the new bits? Do you find it as a teacher now when you go and look at material and you think, oh, I love that, I'm going to put that bit in? How hard is it now as opposed to maybe 15, 20 years ago to implement the progression of our sport athletically? Orla, do you have a...
I would have to say from my experience, I've very fortunately had a lot of students who were much better technically than I was. And I think that I don't feel as a teacher at all that I need to be able to, I just need for them to be able to do it and for me to be able to communicate it to them. So like if you have, and it helps when you've built up so that they've other people in the class to learn from. But I think like you have to face the fact that, there's generations of bodies between mine and theirs. And so I would say like, oh my, don't watch me doing this, watch so-and-so because they're actually really doing it the way I would like it to be. I mean, I can show you all of it, but it's not me doing it. If I was to notate it, I remember when I did my thesis, So my lab notation, the examiner asked me, like, because I notated rocks and cross keys and bicycles, and he said, well, would you show me what these notations are now? And I was like, well, I can show you, but I won't. The person who did that was 19 and a world champion, and I'm neither of those two things. So it's not going to look like that. So I think it's interesting. It depends on your teaching style. Some teachers feel that they have to be able to dance Planks to Davis at 76.5 if they're going to be able to teach it. I've never been like that. I was catapulted into teaching, like in family circumstances, from being like a very much of a show dancer, going to performances, and like I played for the feshes, but I wasn't really into it in that way. And then suddenly I had this whole line of really, really good dancers, and I had to become their teacher very quickly. So I developed, I suppose, a different way of teaching. I think you have to stay. I think Paul is right. You have to stay current, because and I do love the trad stuff. I was looking at videos last night that we did for, like, I won't say how many years ago it was. They're all really good dancers, and a lot of them are teachers now. And I was like, that's really good. It's a different kind of a legacy. But they continued their love of dancing, and I feel that we could lose that. I feel that we can put people off because who retires at 8? Like we have to really think this through, because I think we're doing them a disservice by, like, you have to wait until such an age to drive a car. You have to wait in such an age to, graduate high school. There are certain things that you do at different stages. And I think by jettisoning them too far too soon. Now it's tricky, because if you don't, then they're not in if nobody knows you by under 10, like, are you ever going to break through? And this is the fear. So we put pressure on ourselves, and it's a vicious cycle. So I do know. I mean, I teach in a class. We have a lot of teachers, and some of them would be like, very, very much into the technique. But I think technique is only one part of it. There are other ways that you have to communicate it. So we kind of divide up the jobs. Somebody does the drills, somebody does the musicality, somebody does the yelling, somebody does but it's really hard to do that in a single teacher school. And I think that's where people feel under massive pressure. And that's where I think the internet has really helped, because you don't feel so far away. I don't know, Paul, if you feel that, but I think that can really help. I always feel lucky because I have sisters, brothers, and I have, a really nice teaching team. So if I'm having a down day, someone else can pick it up.
And I think that's such a valuable aspect, is that you kind of feed off each other. And so, for example, in smaller regions where you might only have one teacher, if you have an off night, you have a complete off night, and you've got no one else to kind of back you up and things like that. And I think that's just very true to the smaller regions. But the other thing I kind of wanted to draw on is these dancers that are feeling like they need to retire at 8 and 12. It's potentially the pressure from what we've set out as an organisation, that this is where you need to get to, as opposed to the love of Irish dance, the community that you find. And I'm going to use an example this week. It might get me a little bit emotional, but we had a dancer suffer a bereavement, and the amount of dancers that came out to support her, it wasn't about the dancing, it was about the love and the community and this passion that actually brought them together. Whether they continued with the Irish dance, it was more about, okay, hey, we're here for you. I'm so glad I found you through Irish dance. And I think that's what is being lost at the moment with the really highly competitive aspect that our organisation has, and not sort of filtering down as much as it should do to the levels that are actually just loving and trying to preserve what we have as a tradition. So hopefully we can find ways to do that with it, whether it's festivals or just sort of reducing the ages that are at world events, because it is certainly another elite level, just mentality wise, to compete at that at those really high.
If we go back to what Orla said about maybe having it every second year, would that increase the pressure on teachers? Because effectively, if they're going to college at 18, that only gives them 4 chances to qualify for the world. And if they miss it, they have to wait another 2 years. Would we be just making a rod for our own back there, do you think?
I think there's cons to that for us from our side of the world. Like, if you qualify and your teacher says, hey, look, I think you should go for this experience, you're going to have to wait another 4 years. What if I'm not dancing in 4 years? Like there's so many pros and cons to that. But also the fact that it is very, very expensive for us to travel. And so the dancers that do go are going for, I feel, really the right reasons. They're going because they love what they're doing and they're really truly committed to it. I'm not going to stereotype what happens in the UK, but if you qualify and it's nearby, I'm going to go, right? Like there's more of an opportunity, there's more of an ease to get there. Whereas if you're in our regions, the Southern Hemisphere, I think if it was every 4 years, you would lose a lot of dancers from our side. The fact that you could go every year and you might not qualify the next year, I'm sure that's still the same for the UK, but the expense or the process that goes into going, I'd like to qualify then, and I have to save up from here and here and here. There's a really big 2 to 3 year process for dancers from outside of the world.
So long term now, isn't it?
Yeah, it
And then,
is.
Orla, what would you say we've lost because of that push to athleticism that you would like to still see as part of Irish dancing?
I think it's funny that there's a certain stylistic rhythm, I think, that's not there anymore. And now there are other things that are there. There's height, there's like energy, it's athletic. I think you now have to be, you be I mean, I suppose if you like music and rhythm, you're attracted to that. But not everybody is. That's the other side. So like we often have this discussion if we're adjudicating, like even in our school, like if three or four of us in the same school, we wouldn't necessarily agree. So do you start at the bottom and walk up? Do you start at the top and go down? Do you listen? Like what's so in that you get different opinions in it. So I think there's lost and gained in it. You know what I mean? I think the picture now has taken over from the sound in a very visual environment because now everything is visual. You don't buy a cup of tea unless you like the packaging. Like everything has gone really, really visual. Whereas before, if somebody had like a great rolling treble, you'd be like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. And it's just different. And I also find it's different for the generations. So when I talk to some of our other teachers, they'd be going, oh, but did you not see the way they did this? And I was like, no, I was too put off by the fact that they were like a half a second behind the music. And they were like, oh no, but like they were just landing, like they were like around the music. And so it's a different aesthetic. It's not better or worse. It's just, and I find that really difficult because I find now that I'm having to change. Like we used to do a version of the Job of Journey work, for example, trad set. So innocuous enough, you would think. Did it for my teachers. I remember being asked, where did that come from? And I said, well, that's actually a trad set from Cormac O'Keefe, not a makey up one that you put together because you didn't know the steps. That actually is the one. And I said, my mother is 80 something and she learned that. Her mother learned it from Cormac O'Keefe. But I would never let my kids dance that in a competition because they get nothing because people won't know it. So you find that you are having to let certain things go, is what I'm saying. Even though there's beautiful rolls in it, there's beautiful drums in it. But like Paula said, not everybody can do those things. Those trad sets are really, really hard, like really hard, and they're really testing. So would I put somebody, a really, I'm going to say good dancer, but what's considered to be a really good dancer out, like doing a bad version of a trad set? No. So I finding you have to make those compromises yourself. So I think like when you get the magic of the lift and the posture and the musicality all together, it is art, but it's based on fitness. So you're not going to have one without the other. So if I get somebody who's very athletic and toned and fit, but like they're wooden and there's no personality, that won't interest me at all. So which will I find more it really is a preference. It's very interesting if you watch the way the trends have gone. Like if you're not fit, you're not at the races at all now. Whereas before it used to be if you weren't in time, you weren't at the races. You'll be forgiven now possibly for being out of time as long as you're fit. Now, not by me, but by other. So I find that fascinating. So I'm having to change the order that I would have done. I'd always have done timing first, always. And now I start at the bottom and I do turnout first. And then I do aerobic after that. And then maybe they'll eventually, like the Clare kids be roaring laughing at me because Michael, a lot of them play music anyway. So
Yeah.
like they were like, one young fella said to me, that doesn't make any sense to me in the music. I was like, you are so right, but it's not meant to, because there's all the movement that it needs to have, and you'll start and end with the music. But I thought it was interesting the way a child could have words, on that. So I think for me, I wouldn't say we've lost, but it has changed the relationship with the music, definitely.
Do you think that we need
Music has
like a scale of these things that you're chatting about there? Like, I mean, we don't have, as adjudicators, there is no given, is timing more important, is posture more important, is this, elevation, but should there be a discussion about what is required, what comes first, what's the priority as a judge? And if you're sitting there even at a local feis, judging grades, or you're at the World Championships, judging acceptance, it's the same thing. So that all the children and the parents can then understand what they're all doing, and we can all understand, and has a little bit of clarity.
You'll get clarity, but when there's personal opinion involved, like what Paula said, that's certain, the old je ne sais quoi, that has that gestalt that just impacts. So if you have two dancers and one of them is like really athletic and moves and is impressive, and another one is really elegant and maybe poised, then it just comes down to a straight choice, like it's apples and oranges. So I think we have to help people, you're right, understand how we evaluate the aesthetic, because I think we're entitled to have our preferences. I think that's okay. But I think we need to be able to explain that to people who goes, and she didn't even do one spin and she still won. Nobody said she had to do a spin. So I do think we're not managing that narrative, I think, that there is personal preference involved.
And regional culture too, isn't there? Some regions are crossed over there and others are more about the floor.
I think there's a certain aesthetic to it now, which is you just move around the floor. And that's the athleticism that you're talking about, is I can move around the floor for a whole minute, 20 or 30, whatever it is,
on my toes.
On my toes. And I'm just running around. And yes, that is a skill that is still something that you should be acknowledged for. But what are we looking for? The aestheticness of running around with straight feet, or like Glenn said, what is the criteria? And now choreography is planned to be in front of certain points. There is so much more strategic behind the scenes of going, okay, you can't kick, like I talked before, you can't kick, so we'll put that there in front of that judge. You're doing a beautiful drum or a roll there, and then there, and there. And I think it's become a lot more of a mental game from the teacher's perspective of going, I have to impress these judges. They're going to look at them in the first maybe 16 bars and make a judgment. You kind of have like a preconceived idea of where they're going to be, right? But I think that was never the case back in our day. Like, there was not that you had to perform. And I think that's part of the show culture that's come through, which I love. I love seeing that aspect. But it might be at this point in our time of Irish dancing that it's maybe overshadowing the really strong traditional aspects. I just want to say my group that I'm working with, it's called the Coordination Committee, and this again for CLRG, we're trying to look at all these aspects, because there is nothing that when you do your AD or you do it in any sort of dance organisation, what is the criteria? How are we doing this? How is my personal preference different to yours, and why is yours wrong or right? So I think there'd be some really great insight moving forward for people to pass, or to at least have incentive to pass, if they know what the criteria is and how it's going to be sort of viewed upon from a parent perspective or from that competition perspective. But again, I feel like that's a really big thing at this point in time in Irish dance.
I think that would be wonderful and be very helpful to a lot of people, Paula, if that was able to materialize. And for a lot of people, the mystery of passing the ADCRG is pretty much comes down to the interview and that subjective personal opinion. Having a criteria from which we can all work would help everybody.
It's interesting, Paula, you were talking about almost an engineered choreography to hit, X, Y, and Z into tick boxes. Now, this is coming from my teacher, Mrs. Butler, who brought dancing to Canada. And I remember her saying, now this is probably a very old-fashioned saying, but you should be able to see the Celtic knot work on the floor. That's the way she perceived how the dancing should be, which is a very obviously traditional point of it. And then we did dance dramas. I was fortunate enough to do choreographies and dramas. And she always maintained that whatever the story was read, I should be able to see in the story. So if you say something about a swan in the story, I better see a swan on that stage, because that is the artistry, that is the portrayal, rather than the sheer athleticism which is required. Like Orla said about fitness, there's still that element of the storytelling that we're doing. It's a cultural storytelling, isn't it, across the board? And I'm worried that we're leaving even the space we talked about earlier with Michael, with the slip jig, the changing the timing of the slip jig. Are we teaching, have we stopped teaching children the slow and the pause of the slip jig, which is what makes a slip jig, for the sake of a couple of bars on the metronome? And they're all dancing reels, in my opinion. They're running at it, not holding. So that's just a thought there.
But I love the way that your teacher described the dancing, and I think there is a real possible disconnect between that, what we're talking about with athleticism. But I've always said to my girls and my dancers, a reel and a slip jig are two very different things, right? So a slip jig is smooth but strong, it's sleek. You have to have moments where you are athletic, and there's movements where you're smooth and you're clean. And then the reel, I'm not sure if I can say this on this program.
Go for it.
They're an aggressive little madam. I want to use another word, right? It's out there, it's in your face, and each dance has a quality, and you have to bring that forward. So I was always a slip jig dancer. So I feel like all my kids are possibly slip jig dancers. But yes, the story of whatever you're doing, the reel, the slip jig, the jig, the hornpipe, the Planksy Davis at 76, storytelling is so important, and you have to be musical. I think that's where that kind of ties in. But I love the work of the Celtic knot work. And I think that's what we're kind of missing, as dancers are going, I have to jump here, but are you in time with the music? Are you jumping on the right kind of feel of the music? And that's why I was saying, like, choreography these days is going here, here, and here, as opposed to what is the musicality? What is the drum? Yeah.
That's beautiful, Paula. And I think that's, to be honest, I think that's a lovely place to wrap up our.
What a brilliant way to finish. Well, on that note, thank you all very much for coming. Thanks to Kim and Glenn, and of course our two guests, Paula and Orla. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.